Good evening. This is the India Development Debate right here on ET Now. I'm Supriya Srinath and straight on to the mega survey and mood of the nation poll. There is clearly no stopping the Modi Juggernaut. That is the biggest takeaway from a mega survey conducted by the Times of India along with a string of regional media outfits spread across the country. In what comes as a big boost on the back of the assembly polls in Himachal Pradesh and Gujarat, a whopping 78% of the people who participated in this survey said that they would vote for Modi if elections were to be held today. Congress President-elect Rahul Gandhi comes at a poor second with just 18% backing him for the top job. In fact, the poll goes on to say that Rahul's elevation has done precious little to boost the fortunes of the party ahead of the 2019 general elections, and it seems the big Rahul makeover is perhaps more of a media hype, with almost 60% stating that he has not been able to establish a strong connect with the voters.
When it comes to the state of the economy, a big majority shares the optimism of the Prime Minister, saying that growth will get a leg up in the coming months. Despite the growing criticism against the failure of the Modi government in new job creation, it seems the mood is not all that pessimistic, allaying fears of a polarization on religious lines. The survey says that the BJP should stick to its development agenda, as the temple run is not going to boost its election prospects. So it's a vote for Moditva over Hindutva. More importantly, the voters say India's secular fabric is very much intact, with a big majority saying that the country remains as tolerant as ever. ET Now places the major findings from the survey before a distinguished panel of guests on our flagship show, India Development Debate, tonight to gauge the mood of the nation. And joining us on the India Development Debate tonight, we've got Narendra Taneja from the BJP, Sanjay Jha representing the Congress Party, Yogendra Yadav, founder and national president of the Swaraj India Party, Ajay Chibbar, chief economic advisor at FICCI, Dr. Arvind Virmani, president of the Forum for Strategic Initiative, and Madhavan Narayanan, senior journalist. Thank you so much, gentlemen, all of you, for joining us on the India Development Debate. I'm going to start off with you, Sanjay Jha. Let's get the political reaction first up. Demonetization, GST, farmer crisis, lack of jobs, no private investment, and yet over 78% of the people, of the 6 lakh people who participated in this mega online survey, probably the biggest online poll, believe that if elections were held today, 78% would vote BJP.
No, I think Sandeep, you already made a laundry list of areas where the Indian economy is, frankly, having serious fault lines. So clearly, if there's optimism, despite what a lot of these problems, by the way, are sustained problems. They haven't cropped up overnight. So the response clearly seems to be, on the face of it, hugely surprising. And you look at the recent data, your current account deficit has doubled. Inflation, by the way, is rising. You have the prospect of unemployment, in fact, getting further aggravated. And the index of industrial production has, in fact, gone down again. And from the last data that I read, in fact, the problems seem to have got accentuated. There's only one point I wish to make, that, if you look at the future, there's only one clear, perceptible forecast one can make. And that is that the big bonanza of the oil price benefit, the tailwind that this government had for a long time, for the last 4 years almost, is now vanishing, because the dollar per barrel might be stable at 65, might even reach 70 and over. So I really don't know where this irrational exuberance is coming from. I respect your poll, but probably what happens in online polls very often is that they could have a political prejudice coming in there. But if you look at it from bare, hard numbers assessment, I think this government has got a lot to explain for, because even the GDP at 6.3%, registering a rise after 6 successive falls, is hardly encouraging, because it's still far below 7.5 of the last quarter.
Sanjay,
and
yes.
The coming quarter could
right.
actually, in fact, even go further low. So I really don't know where the optimism is coming from, really.
6 lakh people voting across 10 platforms and 9 regional languages. So this is a very, very consuming survey. It has far-reaching representation. I'm going to take this question to Yogendra Yadav. And Mr. Yadav, that's exactly the question that we asked Mr. Jha, who represents the Congress Party here, that there are a string of issues that you can criticize this government over, whether it's demonetization, economic mismanagement, no jobs, rural crisis, all of that said and done. Mr. Modi seems to be hugely popular. What explains the fact that 80% of those who participated in this survey believe that they will vote for him if elections were held today as we speak?
हेलो योगेंद्र, 1 2 3 4 आपको आवाज.
No, I don't think that audio with him is through. Okay, I don't think that audio with him is through, but I will take it across to. Okay, I'll take it across to Mr. Ajay Chibber. I think he's already there with us. Is Mr. Chibber on? Great. Mr. Chibber, can you explain can you explain this popularity of Mr. Modi? Despite whatever can he be criticized for, 80% of the people of India who are a part of this survey are rallying behind Mr. Modi. They want to vote him in, and not just that, we'll tell you figures that seem to suggest that an overwhelming majority also believes that he's going to make a big comeback in 2019. Mr. Chibber?
So, I mean, you know, I don't know how representative. Yes, I can hear you. I'm responding. I don't know how representative the poll is, but suppose we accept it for what it is. I think, you know, of course, people still have a very strong feeling that Mr. Modi is a leader that will take this country forward over the medium term in a very convincing manner and create a better economy and better jobs. This year, of course, we have had not a very good year. I think your poll mixes up demonetization and GST. Of course, GST is a genuine reform, and I hope 5 years later we will look back on this period as teething problems. And because GST is a reform that will actually benefit this country in an enormous way, both by binding the country together, by creating this common market, but also by raising revenues that we badly need for social and physical infrastructure. Demonetization, I think, you know, quite frankly, those objectives that the Modi government wanted to pursue could have been pursued by much better means than demonetization. I don't really consider demonetization to be a reform. What I am very encouraged by is that, you know, the nationalization of public sector banks that was carried out by Mrs. Gandhi, and by the way, she was also very popular for a while. That's the problem that now Mr. Modi is having to deal with. And so I'm very encouraged by the fact that this problem that they inherited, this twin balance sheet problem, is now being tackled partially, but I think very significantly. And I hope that the reform recap program will be done in a way that actually reduces the number of state banks and also puts money into the better state banks and not sort of spread around across the entire, all the state banks, and then would be quite wasted. I'm also very encouraged by the big boost again on infrastructure, the port-led development, the road program, the railways, the rural infrastructure. But for that, I think we will need more money. And I think, you know, privatization of existing assets, privatization of state-owned enterprises should be pursued. I think the balance sheet of the government should not be public sector companies. It's not the business of government to be running business. It should be really, balance sheet should be more in public infrastructure. I think Mr. Modi's idea of formalizing is a good thing, but it will need labor reforms as well. So I'm quite encouraged.
Mr. Chibber, if I may interrupt you, we do want to talk about Mr. Chibber, if I may please interrupt you, we do want to talk about what he needs to do, but quickly want to cover what the survey findings are before we get down to what he should do with this, you know, with this political capital and this goodwill that he seems to have with the people of this country. I want to get opening comments from all my panelists, so, you know, I hope you indulge me there. But let me get a quick word from Dr. Arvind Virmani. Dr. Virmani, is this poll a reflection of the fact that we have underestimated the performance of this government, or is it simply a reflection of the fact that there is no alternative to this government and to this Prime Minister, because only 20% believe that Congress can become a viable alternative, despite even after the elevation of Rahul Gandhi as the president of the party and the whole buzz that surrounded his elevation. Despite all of that, only 20% believe that the Congress is a viable alternative. So is it the TINA factor, or have we underestimated the good work done by this government?
So let me bring in a point which perhaps has not been mentioned. I think we get used to a daily news cycle, which is really driven in a way by stock market and day-to-day investments. And I think the people are more long-term in their thinking. For one, they know that there is a 5-year election cycle. So my guess is, this is all guessing because these numbers are quite strong, much stronger than I would have expected. So my guess is that people have more patience than we give them credit for. And once they made a decision that there are certain things they like about Modi-led BJP, which I think you're calling Moditwa, and they are quite patient. They are willing to wait it out. So they have not really written him off for the kind of things you're talking about. Of course, we'll discuss how effective or non-effective various things have been. And I think the second point, which even though many economists have said that this demonetization has had certain negative effects which are already in the economy, while any potential economic gains may be there in the future, and we really can't estimate how strong they will be. I think the people, and I hear this again and again, the general public still believes that this is a very important measure against corruption, which had again in the public domain had at least in perception, I don't want to go into details of whether it was more corrupt or not, but in public perception, corruption became a big issue in the 3, 4, 5 years before this last election. And once it becomes a public thing, the people's memory is long. So they are willing to give the benefit of the doubt to Mr. Modi that he is really, they believe that he is trying to do something about corruption, which hasn't at least visibly been done by anybody else. So in my first reaction would be that these are probably the two factors which explain some of the high numbers, which as I said is not something like 78% and 75%, which are little beyond what I would have expected.
Right. Okay, Dr. Virmani, you've made an interesting point there, that at least perception versus action. But I'm going to take this across to Yogendra Yadav. And Mr. Yadav, while 80% of India is solemnly behind Mr. Modi and believes it will, by India I really mean the people who participate in this survey, and it's a big sample size. 6 lakh people have participated in this online poll, and 80% of those who that survey believes that they will vote for Mr. Modi if elections were to be held today. 80% of them also believe that Mr. Modi is going to make a comeback if elections, in 2019. Is this a function of the fact that we've underestimated the good work that he's done and people seem to be buying into that? Or is this perhaps lack of an alternative? There is no alternative to either his economic agenda or any other narrative that he's trying to build.
Supriya, before we get into any serious discussion, let's just notice some of the features of this survey. ET Now is a very serious channel, and I've enjoyed some in-depth discussions on this channel. So it's only fair that we should not use words like India, Indians want it. I'll just remind you of 3 or 4 things because I had the pleasure of discussing this survey an hour ago in Times Now. Number 1, 25% of persons in this sample are not from India. They are out, maybe NRIs, maybe foreigners voting on it. 1. Number 2, it's limited to internet users, and as you know, the universe of internet users, even when you take it in Indian languages, is limited to about top 1/4 of India. So it's about 1/4 of India. The remaining 3/4 is not even considered for this sample. Within that, these are self-motivated people, which is to say those who go out of their way to give opinions. Now, any textbook on sampling, one of the first thing it teaches you is sample size does not matter, representativeness matters. And this survey is almost a textbook example of why not to take large samples seriously. Because it's actually, when you enlarge your sample, which is so very skewed, you are only multiplying your errors, nothing more than that. I'm not saying what you're saying is useless. I'm saying that in whatever we discuss over the next hour or so, let us constantly put in bracket Indians from the top quarter, mostly urban, highly educated, upper class, and of which probably 3/4 were BJP voters anyway, because that's what our election surveys and statistics have always shown us. So we are getting the opinion of very active BJP supporters, most of them. So let's keep that in mind. Number two, in most of the questions, while I heard the initial findings that you presented, I think it's only useful if you actually state the question wording. I found, unfortunately, and I felt sad, it's such a large survey, that question wording is so loaded. These are so guided questions that they cannot get you but one kind of answer. I would expect question wordings to be more neutral, and as and when question wordings are neutral, as for example in the case of Mandir, you get very decent, good responses. So to my mind, what this survey shows is that those who had voted for BJP have largely retained their faith in Mr. Modi, which is not a very surprising finding, but it is an important finding. I would actually think it tells us something. It also tells us that those who were with Mr. Modi in 2014 election would want him to focus on issues of development rather than issues of religious strife, which is again not very surprising, but a useful thing to remember. It also tells you that they have a general sense of optimism about India, but please remember, this I have seen over the last 25 years, Indians are one of those strange people, no matter which class, no matter which time, no matter who the government is, Indians are optimistic about the future of their economy. So that question doesn't tell me very much.
Okay. Yogendra Yadav, I take your comments, and you made some fair points, and I think it's only fair. Obviously, these are internet users. It's not just the English-speaking viewer, and sort of it's also a wider sample because there are 9 Indian languages that have been covered through this. But yes, internet users. So one would argue that these are the urban, affluent Indians, and I take that this is a sample of largely urban, affluent Indians. And yet, some of these findings are sort of important, and the direction that you pointed is also fair. So I'll take that to Narendra Taneja before I get a comment from Madhavan Narayan. Narendra Taneja, Yogendra Yadav says don't read too much into this survey because it's essentially a mood of the urban, affluent Indian who has always been a BJP voter, and he continues to be bullish on the state of the economy and, of course, on the job done by the government. So he says don't read too much into this survey. Narendra Taneja, quick rebuttal from you.
Well, Mr. Yadav is entitled to his opinion because he has questioned the survey itself, and Mr. Sanjay Jha is called, is called the Indian or the voters irrational. So I think in democracy that's the beauty of it. But questioning people, calling people irrational, wrong, just because they have participated in the survey, because the survey's results are not to your liking. But as I said, I'm tempted to really go and comment further on it, but I'll avoid it, to be very honest, because it's an important survey and is very much kind of aligned to the way we experience India. We are not if you look at the number of seats in Parliament and the number of states that we rule, we are definitely not only a party limited to cities. We know this country today in terms of the ground reality, in terms of what people think, what the people's concerns are, what their aspirations are, better than any political party, because we look at our footprint today from north to south and east to west and even beyond India in terms of Indians living overseas is probably the best ever since independence. But the fact is that aspirations of the people are not only economic. There are economic aspirations, there are social aspirations, there are cultural aspirations, and the fact is people, those who can't read, those who can't use internet, those who are even illiterate, the aspirations are more or less the same. All Indians want to see India great. They want India to be a golden bird once again. That's what they want. They may not be able to articulate their thoughts as beautifully as Mr. Yadav can do, but the message is the same. Message is the same. Just because they can't read and write, it doesn't mean that they are not connected as far as the aspirations for India are concerned. Right. And why they are voting for Mr. Modi and Bharatiya Janata Party is very clear. Right. We deliver. We are sincere. Right. We are honest. And we have clarity. We might be committing some mistakes because we are doing something, and everything is fast tracked on our agenda. Fair so point. There might be some mistakes, but people are willing to go along with us because they know the only party which can deliver is this party, and the only leader who can deliver is Mr. Modi.
Okay. By your last point, absolutely. I think people have this overwhelming faith in Mr. Modi because what else explains the fact, and this question is coming your way, Mr. Madhavan Narayanan, 52% of the respondents of this survey say that they would have either not voted for the BJP or are unsure if they would have voted for the BJP had it not been for Mr. Modi. Is it also telling you that it's all about him? He is bigger than the party, he is bigger than the messaging. It's about him. People have faith in him, not the ideology, not the policies, not the ideologue, not the party, but it's all about Mr. Modi.
Well, the answer to your question, Supriya, is yes and no, but let me put it in a slightly more abstract way. Personalities, especially of the Modi kind, tend to be personified manifestations of ideologies. And the ideology of the nation, if I may say so, is middle liberal. It's not left liberal, it's not right wing. That's the difference between Moditwa and Hindutva. And that's what this survey seems to reflect. A middle of the road optimism and faith in the man. And from what I can gather from the survey, this is essentially an extended honeymoon period for Mr. Modi. And particularly the question on GST and demonetization seems to suggest that like Winston Churchill during World War II, Mr. Modi seems to command a certain personality that makes people suffer hardships, and they are willing to undergo those hardships because there is some kind of a pot at the end of the rainbow, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or some promise to be met. Now, but optimism is essentially the triumph of hope over fact. And we have to look at what I call the promise to performance ratio, which still tends to be very high, especially on the jobs front and maybe on the development front, because I distinguish between growth and development in the realm of political economy. Growth is being, well, shortchanged, but even if we assume that we are over the trough and we are looking up ahead, we have only 18 months ahead in which Mr. Modi has to translate growth into development. That means jobs, that means some more visible signs of promise. The fight against corruption has been won symbolically in demonetization and his speeches, but we have to turn that into deliverable goods. I'm afraid this is where Mr. Modi has to show that the faith reposed in him has to be delivered. And let me, last but not the least, say that the Gujarat election campaign showed that Mr. Modi has to work extra hard even in his home state in order to remain popular, and even sometimes lower the standards of public discourse and make it shrill. And therefore, although let me end with a joke, you know, Adam asked Eve, do you love me? And Eve says, who else is there? Mr. Modi is right now in the position of Eve, and the time in front of him is shorter than it might appear from your midterm poll.
Sure. Okay. Now I want to get back to, this is the India development debate, the only debate on Indian television that puts the spotlight on development, and taking a cue from the point that, Yogendra Yadav made, we don't want to debate too much about Modi and Rahul Gandhi, but the cue that this survey says is very clear that he has no choice, frankly, but to put the spotlight on development. This vote seems to be in favor of Moditwa over Hindutva. 82% of the urban affluent polled in the survey believe BJP should be sticking to Vikas rather than pulling in religious issues into campaign. Is that the big headline, Dr. Virmani, from this survey, that the government needs to focus all its energies on nothing but development?
Well, if Mr. Yadav's interpretation of it being the top layer is correct, then actually it's even more significant, because what it is saying is that the urban elites of this country favor, what was the number, I forget, you said 80%, favor economic issues, which is very encouraging for an economist like me, who spent all his life on this matter, over social and other issues. That I agree with people who have said that it's not that social issues are not important, but the fact that most people are more interested in growth and development, jobs, whatever you want to call it, and this is if it is the top layer, it's not just a matter of jobs, it's a matter of growth. People in that layer care a lot about growth, because growth raises opportunities as against just getting a job in a company or so on. So I think even from that limited perspective, I think it's quite an important result and an important message, I think, for both Mr. Modi and for the BJP.
Fair point. Mr. Yadav, I want to draw attention to something that people believe will be a huge poll issue. And in fact, that's the Ram Mandir. And almost 60% actually in this poll believe it should not be made a political issue. Do you believe Ram Mandir is a major issue for 2019 general elections? Yes, say 31%. No, say 59%. And of course, there are 10% who are undecided. But there is an overwhelming majority that is saying no there. What explains it then? Is this then self-explanatory that people don't care about Hindutva, people care about development, and that's what they want Mr. Modi to focus on? That's what he was elected in 2014 for.
Yeah, that's the broad message that you get from this survey, that among the largely urban, largely affluent, principally BJP voting population, even there, they do not want Mandir to become the issue. They want development to be the issue. They do not want distractions to religious strife to dominate this country. They want issues of economic well-being and development to dominate this country. That's a fair conclusion. It's a significant conclusion, even if it pertains only to the top layer, because that top layer does matter. I should only add one more thing, because you mentioned GST and demonetization. I would draw your attention to the exact wording of this question, and I think in a serious channel like this, let's pay attention to these things, because if I share any debate on your channel on Sensex, I'm amazed with the kind of nuance that you deal with, which is the nuance that you need to. Mid-cap, small ones, all kinds of nuances are being discussed. Similarly on this question, the question wording on GST actually carries a very loaded expression, reform. Are reforms like GST and demonetization? The moment you put a positive glow word like there, you're bound to get a yes. I mean, this is what we have known in the 20 years of survey experience. These are not neutral questions. If a neutral question was asked about GST, if a neutral question was asked separately about demonetization, I'm sure you would have got a very different response. So in that sense, I'm disappointed that with such a large survey, we are unable to actually tap into opinions because of a certain kind of lopsided questions that you have here, sadly.
Okay. You raised a question on lopsided question in the survey. I'm not here to defend the survey. It was done, of course, by our group itself, the timesofindia.com team, and of course, a massive response has come in. And I don't want to get into whether the questions were loaded in one direction or other, but to move the debate away to Sanjay Jha, an important point that I want to make here, Sanjay Jha, is that people, whichever way you look at it, no matter the framing of the questions, whether it could be better or not, is that people believe that they're willing to give this government a long rope on a lot of what we call fringe loose stock, what the Congress has accused this government of spreading quote-unquote communal poison, but people are willing to give the government a long rope because an overwhelming majority believe that India remains more tolerant, that only 30% believe India has become less tolerant under NDA. Does that sort of, in a sense, is that reflective of the mood at least of urban Indians? Sanjay Jha?
Sandeep, to be honest with you, if anybody in our country has seen what happened to that innocent man in Rajasthan who was butchered and then burned to death, I think it's probably the most appalling incident I have seen, and that's a manifestation of where we are. I can't make any further observation. I think the results of the survey, frankly speaking, don't seem to be in sync with the modern reality we live in. I think the first thing that we are forgetting under this government is before you live in an economy, you live in a society. And to add to what Yogendra Yadav said, I just want to make one very quick point. First, a clarification. It was very unethical on the part of Mr. Taneja to twist my statement. I was not calling people irrational. I was saying the response of the people seems to be irrational exuberance, given the fact that the overall economic indicators seem to be depressing. I don't think we should try and twist statements for some cheap brownie points. But the larger point, Sandeep, that you have raised, I think is fundamental to our discussion today. I mean, if you look at the situation across India, There is a fear today amongst large sections of India, particularly the minorities. Is that good for the health of a country? The answer is no. In fact, I will go so far as to say, if you look at some of the broad economic parameters, you have already listed out many, but look at jobs, look at exports, look at consumption spending or the mood of consumption spending, look at gross fixed capital formation, private investment linked to that. You'll find why are all these figures looking down? And I feel somewhere, whether we like it or not, we need to accept one reality. If the energies or the priorities of this government is somewhere towards polarization and winning of elections, economic decisions will always never reach the qualitative dimension they should. If you don't have good social harmony, economic growth cannot be commensurate with whatever targets you set. And therefore, that one point that Yogendra added, I need to add to it. You see, this issue about leadership, and since Mr. Rahul Gandhi's name is mentioned, I need to make, just let me make this one point. You see, don't forget, Mr. Modi won the 2014 election with 282 seats. He is the leader by far, but with just 31% of the votes. So, end of day, don't forget, I mean, when the larger political ecosystem, I don't think you will get these kind of results at all. I think there is going to be, it's a diverse country, and when we get a lot of people coming in from Odisha, Assam, the Northeast and Uttar Pradesh, I think the entire outcome could be remarkably different.
Okay, Sanjay Jha, you made a spirited point, and I know Narendra Taneja wants to respond to that. I'll come to you in just a bit, Mr. Taneja, because I don't want, this politics of religion to hijack this discussion. And I know, I don't want to veer away from the economic issues and issues of importance. Mr. Ajay Chibbar, despite all the economic slowdown we've seen with our growth plummeting to levels of 5.7%, a big job crisis, our farms being under stress, 74% of those who participated in this survey, and with all the caveats that Mr. Yogendra Yadav has put out there, they do share the Prime Minister's optimism that the economy is set to grow. I mean, 74% of those people. Where is this optimism coming from? Mr. Chibbar.
Yeah, I mean, I think people always hope for better, but this year we've seen a big slowdown. But I said, the two things that are encouraging are bigger money on infrastructure and the attempting to tackle the twin balance sheet problem. In the end, I mean, the economy will only grow if private investment takes off, and private investment is very down at the moment. And if that doesn't revive, I don't think the economy can really grow. Now, what will drive private investment? One is, addressing this balance sheet problem. The other is, of course, infrastructure. But there are two other very important factors. And I think, also we have to realize what's happening in the US. The corporate tax rate is coming down to 20%. In most advanced economies, the corporate tax rate is now 22%. So we are still at 30, although the effective rate is probably a little lower. But the government had promised going down to 25, and that's clearly something that could be done to boost, the private investment activity. Also, entrepreneurship will improve with the reduction in corporate taxes. I mean, startups will be bigger. There will be more startups in the economy. So that's something that they could look at. Then I think if you think of the economy running on 4 engines, this year only the government spending engine was working to some extent. So we have to get exports growing much faster, and despite the fact that the world economy improved this year, our exports did pick up a little bit, but much less than many other countries. And then we had a surge of imports. So I think the competitiveness of this economy, the real exchange rate is a very important factor. The RBI has kept interest rates very high. Of course, they can justify it now because inflation has started to pick up. So these are some short-term factors. But just let me come to your poll results, if they are right, are quite interesting because they show that if the BJP wins another few state elections, they will have the Rajya Sabha. Then the excuse that we can't tackle very difficult reforms, which we need, like labor reform, land reform, land acquisition law, etc. Those are big items. And then really, if you look at China, You know, China did a very major administrative reform
Mr.
after
Chibber,
they did their economic reform. And we really haven't tackled those sorts of
Right.
issues, you know. So I think this is where we need to go
Sure.
for the future as well.
Okay. So what you're saying is, what you're saying is, you know, you can't now offer any more excuses. But I want to bring up, since there was so much of talk on demonetization and GST, and with the caveat that the question on demonetization was this, I don't want to tell this to our viewers, that the question on demonetization was Modi government right in pushing for tough reforms like demonetization and GST? So like Yogendra Yadav said, it qualified demonetization and GST as a reform. I would argue that GST is a reform, whichever way you look at it. But Madhavan Narayan, simple question to you is, despite the sort of framing of the question, the fact remains that on this particular question, 3/4 of those polled believe the government was right. My own view is that I think somehow most commentators, most economic commentators have misread the impact of these reforms. In some ways, because the rural India voted in UP, we saw the mandate was overwhelmingly in favor of the BJP soon after demonetization. And now this poll seems to suggest that even the urban affluent has supported the government and the Prime Minister on both these contentious and controversial reforms, at least demonetization for one was. Are we missing something? Have we misread, the political capital out of these reforms? Because people argue that, poor liked it because the rich is being inconvenienced, but this is clearly something beyond that, Madhav.
Like I said earlier, Sandeep, there is a Churchill element in this. You remember Churchill said, "I've come to give you blood, sweat, toil and tears." So sometimes some great political salesmen manage to make positives out of something that looks negative, like a bitter pill that will cure you of your disease. But let us not confuse some kind of admiration or appreciation of decisiveness with support for the measure itself. The support that Mr. Modi has got for demonetization and GST, particularly demonetization, is more about the decisiveness than about the intrinsic goodness in the decision itself. So people want Mr. Modi, to use a cricket analogy, to play his strokes, and that seems to be working because for better or for worse, the Congress government, the UPA government before was seen as somewhat wishy-washy. So Mr. Modi has ended the wishy-washiness, but like batsmen playing strokes in cricket, if you can play a sixer on one ball, you might get caught out in the next one, and therefore there are some inherent risks in the strokes, and that is why I often say, pointing to the Gujarat election and how the backward castes were mobilized, that Mr. Modi is batting on a wicket that is tougher than it looks. But the optimism is in his favor, the mood is in his favor, and most important of all, the country overall seems to be in a frame of mind to support hard decisions, but this is under the critical assumption that it will show something of a collateral on the other side. The big question to ask is there something to really show, let's say, 6 months from now? And I don't think there is enough.
You don't think there's enough to show 6 months from now? But as far as the political dividends of demonetization and GST are concerned, he seems to be reaping them not just with UP or with the affluent urban people who've polled in this. I'm going to take this question more on the economic line. And Mr. Taneja, you've got to answer this candidly. Like I said, political dividends have been very rich, and Mr. Modi has been able to reap those. What about the economic benefits? When do we see those begin to accrue? They have taken a toll, both of these decisions, on the economic trajectory per se, the growth per se, whether it was 5.7% or 6.3%. But what about the benefits, and when will they begin to accrue?
Well, good question. You see, demonetization was a reform, was a major reform, unpleasant reform, but major reform. And people have actually given a big thumbs up for the demonetization. Yes, there are dividends, but mostly dividends the way we look at our economic. Because with demonetization, we have managed to clean up the bottom, the cancerous cells at the bottom of the economy, and the result is that today economy at the very foundation and the structures are much stronger than ever before. since independence. And with that, we have started now in a way a new era as far as economic growth is concerned. GST is another major reform, major reform, probably the mother of all reforms so far. And there are many other reforms in the pipeline. Just wait and watch. So what we are basically trying to do is that, and that's what the people are voting for Prime Minister Narendra Modi and BJP, is simple because they know this government is very clear in terms of direction, and at the same time does not hesitate to take unpleasant decisions. If the decision is in the interest of the people, in the interest of the economy, government would go ahead and take that decision. So people know that, and that's why they're supporting. In terms of the benefits are already, you see, for those people who are watching it closely or looking at the on the ground very carefully, the benefits are already there, and that is one of the reasons that thanks to demonetization now GST, that foreign investment is flowing, even domestic investment. Just wait for another 2-3 months, you will see that in showing in terms of numbers also. It starts showing. But by 2018, by next middle of next year and monsoon of next year.
I'm going to interrupt you. Yogendra Yadav, let's sort of, talk about the road ahead. And what this survey clearly demonstrates is that the Prime Minister and the government enjoy tremendous political capital and tremendous goodwill. You'd argue with the urban affluent. You'd argue that it's always been there. But given that they have this, what should the government do with it? What should the Prime Minister do with it, given the fact that he's managed to, with his brilliant political messaging, sell demonetization, GST, etc. to the people of this country? What should the Prime Minister put this political capital to use for?
My one request, we are dealing with the skewed and unrepresentative sample. We are dealing with the very leading questions. And on top of it, let us not have loaded interpretation. That's the last thing we should be doing here. I think the Prime Minister and most politicians are wiser. They know that this survey does not actually represent the voice of the people. They know that, and the Prime Minister, I'm sure, knows, he's a very intelligent person, no matter what my other opinions about him. He knows that his constraints are actually increasing, not decreasing. There is rural unrest, there is agrarian crisis, there are massive demands coming from that sector, and my own sense is that if he at all is serious about winning the 2019 election, which I'm sure he is, he would accord that the priority, not the things you and I may wish to list here, because it so happens that the opinion of the pink press and the opinion of the people of this country happens to be in entirely different boxes. So my own sense is that over the next 1 year, the demands on the limited fiscal resources of the government will increase. The government would have to go for certain kind of measures, which probably people sitting in this room would call populist, because the government would need to address a very serious crisis in rural India, something that we have not even spoken about. And this point about jobs not being an anxiety, I'm sure Prime Minister knows better. He knows that jobs are one of the principal anxieties in this country. That is what they would be wanting to address. And of course, the Prime Minister would want to sort out whatever problems they have with GST, because these are things which have been introduced, cannot be rolled back. The point would be to try and smoothen that out. Expecting anything more than that in the year to come would be politically unrealistic and would not connect with the India that happens to be the country where we live, not the India that is surveyed in this particular sample.
All right, fair point. But I'm going to take this across to Dr. Arvind Virmani, and I get the point that Yogendra Yadav did make, that this perhaps doesn't represent the entire India. This doesn't reflect the will of the people. But let's give it to the man that he's hugely popular. If you just go by the exit polls one after the other, he seems to enjoy a lot of traction amongst Indians, whether it's affluent Indians. I mean, that's debatable, whether it's rural India at all. But given the political capital that he continues to enjoy, and every election is about Mr. Modi, Gujarat was all about him. So let's keep the survey aside and let's just talk about Gujarat then. Given the political capital that he enjoys, what are the 3 things that you would like him to focus on next? Here's a man who's been able to convince India on demonetization. He's a man who's got GST rolling. Maybe not a perfect GST, but he's got it rolling and people are embracing it now. What does he need to do next? Dr. Virmani.
Well, Well, you know, everybody else on this show has been asked about economics and talked about it. So let me take half a minute to tell you my view of the economy. You know, there are basically three factors which have been affecting the economy over the last few years. One is the global slowdown, which has affected the tradable sector or the corporate sector of the economy. Second is the credit problem, the high real interest rates and the NPA problem, which my friend from FICCI mentioned. And the third was the double drought. You know, people don't realize how rare two consecutive droughts are. They come in a decade and a half. All these three factors are reversing. Okay, the external environment is improving. There is a strong recovery in Europe and USA. The real interest rates are going to rise, even though it's due to a reversal of the inflation, and the NPA problem is beginning to be solved. And the double drought has been followed by one monsoon which was good, but it affects with a lag, and we are in the second normal monsoon. Now, the only problem which demonetization created, all the data which I have looked at, you know, objectively as an analyst, shows that there was a disturbance in, for example, the return of the rise of the real wage rate in the rural areas, but it was disturbed. The recovery was disturbed by demonetization. So when I look forward at all these three factors are being reversed, and therefore in the next 18 months before the election, the economy in my view is definitely going to recover. So that is one. The second is most of the reforms have been mentioned again by my friend Ajay over there, but if you ask me, the one which is the most difficult and probably won't happen is land, which would because of the experience in the beginning of the term, which would be most positive for agriculture. Right. And the other two reforms similarly, unfortunately, there seems to be a big thing against, you know, the Agriculture Produce Marketing Act and the Essential Commodities Act. You know, there is nobody there, you know, people complain about there being nobody to buy these goods. Why don't we free up the private trade? You know, are farmers still as ignorant as assumed 70 years ago that they cannot look after their interests? Right. Free the trade. Let the private traders buy their goods. You know, we keep complaining that the government is unable to buy, but at the same time we oppose this liberalization which will help the farmers.
Sure. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with all the points that you've made there, Dr. Virmani, but really running out of time, so I want to get quick closing comments from my panelists. 30 seconds to you, Dr. Chibber. You spoke in an earlier comment, you articulated what the government needs to focus on: land reforms, labor reforms, privatization, etc., etc. You know, bringing down corporate taxes, but which is what organizations like FICCI espouse, and many of them we support at ET now as well. But what do you think the government will do, given the political climate, given the fact that this government doesn't want to be boxed in a corner of being seen as a soot boot ki sarkar? What is the one thing that you think this government will do?
So I think you know, the slogan "Make in India" is a great slogan, but we are being hammered by cheap imports from China and other countries. Our exports are struggling. So I think that's an area, so we had a industrial policy in '56. We had a revision of that industrial policy in '91. This is the time for a new trade and industrial policy, and if they focus on that, has a range of issues linked to it, like the exchange rate, the credit, of course, but also labor policy, etc., and also a review of these FTA free trade agreements that we have signed on willy-nilly and actually have hurt, some of them may have even hurt us. So I think this kind of a move would be very useful. Focusing on jobs, but I think to focus on jobs, you have to focus on investment, and you have to focus on labor law. I mean, you can say we want to make the economy more formal, which is where we are going, but if you don't do labor reform, right, you are going to end up with people getting hammered in the unorganized sector, and then there are no jobs. Right. There's probably growth, but a jobless growth in the formal sector. So right, I think those combination of things
Yes,
is
Dr.
what
Shikha.
I would push for at this stage. You know.
I really am running out of time. I'm sorry, I'll have to interrupt you there. But Madhavan Narayanan will quickly give you 30 seconds. What are the 3 things that you would like Mr. Modi to do next?
Let me pick a word of style from Mr. Modi. Let's call this the BJP. 3 things: B for banks, J for jobs, and P for peace. And banks means he has to fix the banks, and they are not doing it fast enough, both in recapitalization as well as insolvency. Jobs have to be shown, because we are going through a huge demographic transition. It's a bigger time bomb than you think. And peace, all the playing with fire by BJP cadres and RSS cadres is not going to do anything for the so-called Moditwa. I think that's too much of a risk that he's taking there, and this will send a good message if politically there is more focus on social peace. So BJP, banks, jobs and peace. Thank you.
BJP should focus on BJP. Okay, it's not very often that the politicians hardly get a word in on a panel. That's how it's turning out here. But I have to give a word to both Sanjay Jha and Narendra Taneja. So Narendra Taneja, to you first. And you know, this survey is largely the mood of urban affluent India. And would you agree that if a similar survey were to be done of rural India, like Yogendra Yadav pointed out, the findings could possibly be radically different?
No, the findings would be more or less the same. As I said, aspirations are the same. They may not be able to articulate their thoughts as well as Mr. Yadav, but their aspirations are exactly the same as people living in big cities. And that's the reason, you know, our focus is in modernizing rural economy. Actually, if you ask me, that's our top focus, modernizing rural economy. And we will deliver 8% GDP in 2018. You will see that, and you will hopefully also cover that. But at the same time, the biggest focus at the same time is that how do we bridge the gap between the poor and the affluent. As far as peace is concerned, you know, no political party, whether BJP or Congress, you know, peace and social harmony has been evolving in India for last 7,000 years, and nobody can change it. So don't get it wrong. People are the same. India is the same. India stands for peace, and therefore all political parties, including BJP, stand for peace.
All right. So as far as rural economy is concerned, your idea is to modernize it. Many people will say there's a lot of distress there that needs to be solved. But Sanjay Jha, what is it that the Congress, forget about this poll, but the reality is that the urban middle class affluent voter is perhaps, you know, happy with Mr. Modi. What is it that the Congress will do to win him over?
You know, Supriya, is interesting, but I was looking at the Gujarat exit poll data, and I was very happy to see that the younger people in Gujarat, between the ages of 18 to 25, have apparently voted overwhelmingly in favor of the Congress party. So I think these demographic trends will shift gradually. If jobs don't happen, I think this government is a serious crisis that it cannot ignore. But I want to make 2 very quick points here. You know, we are all ignoring the reality of a huge headwind which is now occurring. The oil honeymoon for Mr. Modi's government that they have benefited from is over. I think oil prices are likely to be extremely aggressive going forward in the coming year. So you can see a massive pressure happening on the government right away. It will probably fuel inflation. But bad news is going to be fiscal deficit. As we all know, the government has probably already consumed 96% of it. And the GST collections are down. So with the growth being down at 6.3, even if it goes up a bit, where is your tax revenue is going to come from? So I think we have some very serious problems. My one advice to Mr. Modi's government is, for God's sake, do not play this Hindu-Muslim politics for political dividends. India is a secular democracy. It's not just in the constitution. I think Indians practice it. And I think this government needs to respect that. They can win as many elections as they want, but I think at the end of the day, India will remain with serious damages on the social fabric. I don't think we can afford it.
Okay. It's not just Sanjay Jha, but an overwhelming majority of the 6 lakh people who participate in the survey are telling this government that we are with you, but focus on development and nothing else. On that note, Sanjay Jha, Yogendra Yadav, Narendra Taneja, Ajay Chibber, Dr. Arvind Virmani and Madhavan Narayanan, thank you so much for taking time out and helping us understand and interpret this mega survey put out by timesofindia.com. Thanks for being with us on the India Development.
Stay tuned to BT now, because Top 10 at 10 is coming up right next.